Hey everyone, I'm Joe and today I'm doing my July reading wrap up part 2. This is everything I read from July the 16th to July the 31st. I will link part 1 of my wrap up in the description box below. I read 8 books in total and a pile of short stories. I'm not going to talk about these short stories in this video however, because this upcoming Saturday I will be doing a live show which I do on a monthly basis with Rachel, known as Canadian Booktube, where we'll be talking about our favourite short fiction that we read over the previous month, and I'll link that in the description box below as well. Out of the 8 books I read for this half of July, 7 of them were for the Booktubeathon, the readathon event that happened 2 weeks ago, and I've already done a wrap up for that Booktubeathon, so I will only very briefly mention those 7 books, and then the one other book that I read that wasn't for it, I will focus on that slightly more. And there'll also be 2 movies at the end of the video as well, which both have a literary connection of sorts. The first book that I read, and the only one that I read that wasn't part of the Booktubeathon, was Where Lathe the Sweet Bird Sang by Kate Wilhelm. This is an older science fiction book, and the focus of it is around a family who foresee the end of civilization and the collapse of civilization as we know it. So they get all their extended family and pull it in to this mountainous home that they have, where they've got several houses and a cave system and farm area and all this sort of thing. And then the world does indeed collapse as they foresee, and they decide that the only way to survive into the future is to have cloning. Obviously they have to get all the equipment and the technology available and the knowledge together to clone themselves into the future. And the book is then basically these generations of clones, and one generation in particular the book focuses on, which sounds slightly peculiar, but it does work in a way. I liked the overall concept of it and I liked a lot of the ideas. However, the one flaw with this book, and indeed the reason that I didn't mark it as highly as what I might have otherwise done, is because it felt very lackluster and didn't do quite as much as what it could have done. The material it had to work with was really good. It had really intricate ideas to play with, but it didn't do enough with them, frankly. And I felt disappointed really with this book in that way, because the ideas really could have been something phenomenal and they were merely mediocre, maybe good, but certainly not phenomenal. So I would recommend it if you want to read a book that is significant to science fiction genre in general, but overall not a great one by me. So now I'll talk about the 7 books that I read as part of the Booktubeathon. I'm not going to talk about these in any depth because of course I've already talked about them in my wrap up. The first of which is The Sirens of Titan by Vonnegut. I liked the overall ideas of this. I didn't like the execution of the ideas however in the book, and I didn't particularly like the characters at all. They felt very flat and emotionless, which is a shame because having emotionless characters for this idea doesn't quite work. It needed slightly more emotion, at least in my opinion it did. This has not put me off more Vonnegut in the future however, because I'm interested to read what else is written, just not this particular one. I wouldn't recommend that highly. Although if you want to read something significant to the science fiction genre, well, all of these books are significant to the science fiction genre, then this might be worthwhile reading. Next up is The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester. I loved this book. This is the first ever book by Bester that I've ever read, and it will not be the last. I have no idea what else Bester has written however, so I can't predict what his other books are like. But I really did like this one. It had some really interesting psychological elements to it, and the plot crafting and building was remarkable. It was extremely intricate and nuanced, and frankly I haven't read a book with such a well crafted plot in ages, probably for most of this year in fact, and I would highly recommend this book. I really would. Then we have The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula Guin. This has some large psychological elements in it with some gallows humour to boot, which really does work with the plot. However, the psychological elements in it are both the biggest positive of the book, they're also the biggest drawback in many ways, because some of the elements worked really well, some of them didn't. They felt broken, and the way the characters interacted on a psychological level, for me, didn't work well. But I did like it overall. It just wasn't one of my favourite Le Guins, and I will obviously be reading more Le Guin in the future because I really do like Le Guin. She's one of my favourite science fiction authors. Next we have The Fountains of Paradise by Arthur C. Clarke. I loved this book. This was probably my joint favourite of the Booktubeathon event. This is hard science fiction without the heavy, intricate technical details, however, thrown in, so it's a bit easier to manage. And the focus is basically on humanity's drive to be something greater than what we are. It's looking forward to the future and looking up and out to the stars and the universe in general, and wanting to be greater than what we are in a really significant and very introspective way. I love this book and I can't recommend it enough. Then I read Babel 17 by Samuel R. Delany. I have read one other Delany in the past called Nova. This has certain similarities in certain ways because it's to do with a slightly peculiar sort of ship and its rather unusual crew. Although that's pretty much the only connection really in that sense. And it's about language and communication. It's a very weird book. Unfortunately though, this is not the interesting kind of weird that I enjoy. This is just the peculiar weird that doesn't really work for me, and sadly I didn't mark this very highly. The next book was First Men in the Moon by H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells is a very well known and a very well liked author, and indeed some of his books are considered very important to the science fiction genre. However, I did not like this book at all. The overall idea of the plot is somewhat interesting. However, the characters were very flat, emotionless stereotypes, and not good stereotypes. They were frankly annoying, and you would have been quite happy for them to be murdered in any way because of that, frankly unlikable. The science was really bad. I'm aware that it was 1901, but it was still terrible. I mean, basically, they made a football-shaped spaceship and then painted it with anti-gravity paint. And the anti-gravity paint somehow worked in space. Yeah, that annoyed me real bad. But I still finished it, but I'm not going to be in a hurry to reread it. Actually, considering this is a new book, I doubt I will ever reread this book because I really didn't like it. Everything about this book felt wrong and just didn't work with every other part. There is a film of it which I liked much better, which was made in the 60s, and that actually is well made, and the characters aren't unlikable, and it's not emotionless as well. So I'd recommend the film over the book. And finally, the last book I read in July was The Forever War by Joe Haldeman. This was a deep, meaningful look at war. Joe Haldeman served in Vietnam, and as is the case with a lot of people who served in Vietnam, he was profoundly moved enough to write this book, which is an exploration of war and its effects on both the people who serve and the people left behind, and indeed then the integration of the soldiers when they try to come back into normal society. This was phenomenal. I loved this book. I cannot recommend this book enough to everybody alive, frankly. It was that important. I am going to do a separate review on this book. That's how much I liked it. So I'm not going to say anything more now, other than to say you should read this book. You really should. So that's it for the books I've read this month. Now I'll talk about the two films that I watched. The first of which is Star Trek Beyond. Since the original Star Trek series, there has been multiple books written and graphic novels created, all based around the Star Trek universe. Star Trek Beyond is much better than the previous film, Star Trek Into Darkness, and is probably just as good as the first Star Trek films. I'm not a fan of the original Star Trek, however, so I can't really comment on that. Overall, the film was really, really good. The star performance of the film was definitely Sophia Boutella, who played Jayla. She stole every single scene she was in without a doubt. Her performance was fantastic, and she should win some kind of award of some kind for her performance. The rest of the cast were good, but compared to her, they were merely mediocre. She really did stand out. The overall plot of the film was good once again. Well, compared to the first film anyway. Second film was debatable. And I really did enjoy the film. One thing that they managed to get rid of from the first and second Star Trek, however, was the whole lens flare problem, which they kept doing repeatedly in those films. However, the one thing that they did more of in Beyond was the shaky cam flaw. They used shaky cam a lot. Most of the time it was for a valid reason, but some of the times it felt like they were just shaking along after people almost because they could, and it felt a little bit silly, frankly, at times. The second film that I watched was Jason Bourne. These are based on the Robert Ludlum books of the same name, of course. This is the fourth film starring Matt Damon, with Paul Greengrass directing. The original trilogy I watched at cinema, and I loved all three films. They were just frankly brilliant. Then they made the fourth film, which didn't star Damon or had Paul Greengrass directing. I still liked that film, however. Some people don't, some people do. Obviously, on the latter. This one was a good, solid Jason Bourne film, and yet again, the way that Matt Damon brings Jason Bourne to life as this amnesiac spy / sort of assassin is frankly remarkable. He really does do a brilliant performance of the film. Obviously, I'm hoping that he does more Bourne films, although he has said that he'd be quite happy now to have a younger actor play Jason Bourne, take over the role, because he's done what he wants with the film, apparently. Obviously, I'm hoping he still manages to make another one, or 10, because I really do like these films. So that's it. If you've read any of these books or would like to read any of them, then please leave me a comment below and we can have a conversation. If you've watched any of the two films as well, then please leave a comment and we can talk about them, or indeed other Star Trek or Bourne related items of any kind. All my social media links, as well as all the links to the various videos that I mentioned, which there are quite a few of, can be found in the description box below. I mean, that said, that is it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.